Welcome to a new chapter with The Green Leaves, a captivating audiobook experience. Prepare to embark on a journey filled with intriguing discoveries and unexpected twists. This story explores themes of growth, change, and the enduring power of hope. Get ready to be swept away by a narrative that will resonate long after you've turned the final page, or in this case, finished the final chapter. We hope you enjoy the journey. This production is brought to you by author Gustavo Ruiz and narrated by the talented Logan Palmer. Settle in and prepare to be enthralled. Story 1. The Ledger and the Labyrinth. The Unspoken Canvas. The scent of turpentine and freshly worked clay was Brenda Torres's sanctuary, a vibrant, chaotic symphony of creation that filled the converted loft she shared with Patrick Flores. Sunlight filtered through the towering windows overlooking the city, dappled across unfinished sculptures, half-formed figures caught in moments of raw emotion. Brenda, hair pulled back, a smudge of terracotta on her cheek, ran a hand over the cool, damp surface of a new piece, a twisting, reaching form she tentatively called longing. It was a physical manifestation of a feeling that had become an unwelcome guest in their once impenetrable bubble of domestic bliss. Patrick, her husband of 7 years, the anchor to her swirling artistic soul, was conspicuously absent. Again. The muted hum of the city below offered little comfort, only a stark reminder of the corporate jungle he navigated daily. He was a brilliant man, a pragmatic business person with a mind like a steel trap, capable of dissecting market trends and forecasting profits with unnerving precision. She admired his drive, had always been captivated by the quiet intensity that simmered beneath his composed exterior. But lately, that intensity had calcified, forming a barrier between them. The aroma of her evening meal, a spicy lamb tagine, wafted from the kitchen, a stark contrast to the aroma of clay she'd cooked his favorite, hoping to lure him home to the warmth, the color, the life of their home. But it was past 9, and his side of the king-sized bed, pristine and undisturbed, mocked her quiet efforts. She imagined him still hunched over a glowing screen, perhaps with a tasteless, lukewarm takeout container beside him, his brow furrowed in concentration. His work, the financial empire he helped to build, demanded everything, and lately, it felt like it took everything from them. Brenda sighed, wiping her hands on a paint-splattered rag. She moved through the loft, her gaze falling on a vibrant, abstract painting they'd bought together years ago, its bold strokes mirroring the passion that had once defined their every interaction. She remembered their early days, the whirlwind romance that had swept her off her feet, his initial fascination with her uninhibited creativity, her delight in his quiet strength and sharp intellect. They were opposites, yes, but a perfect counterpoint, each completing the other. He brought structure to her fluidity. She brought color to his monochrome. Now, the colors seemed to be fading. Patrick would arrive home late, his tie loosened, eyes heavy. He'd offer a quick, tired kiss, mumble something about a crucial deal, and disappear into his study, the faint glow of his laptop screen illuminating the gap between them until the early hours. Mornings were a blur of hurried breakfasts, snatched conversations about logistics, not feelings. The intimacy that once flowed so freely between them had become a trickle, then a drip, now almost a drought. They still shared a bed, but the space between their bodies felt vast, filled with unspoken anxieties and the weight of his endless demands. She picked up a framed photo from their wedding day, their faces beaming, her hands in his, a testament to a vibrant, unshakable love. He had looked at her then with a hunger, a devotion that had made her feel like the most treasured work of art. Where had that gaze gone? Had it been replaced by the calculating scrutiny he reserved for quarterly reports? A notification pinged on her phone, a message from her gallery owner, praising her latest submission. A small victory, yet it felt hollow without Patrick to share it with, to see his quiet pride, to feel his arm around her in celebration. She knew he was proud of her work, he always said so, but it was an abstract pride, a mental acknowledgement, rarely accompanied by the active engagement she craved. He hadn't visited her studio in weeks, hadn't asked about her creative process, hadn't truly seen her, Brenda, the artist, the woman, the partner, in what felt like an eternity. She closed her eyes, picturing him in his high-rise office, The city lights a glittering backdrop to his relentless ambition. She understood his drive. Success was important to him. But at what cost? Was it worth sacrificing the quiet moments, the shared laughter, the tender touches that were the very fabric of their love story? The question hung in the air, heavy and unanswered, another brushstroke on the unspoken canvas of their widening distance. The lamb tagine, now cooling on the stove, would likely remain untouched. And the ache in her chest, like the half-formed sculpture, yearned for completion, for connection, for him to simply be present. The sculpted silence. The evening of Brenda's solo exhibition opening arrived, bathed in the soft, ambient glow of the downtown gallery. Her latest series, Echoes of the Soul, was displayed prominently, a collection of emotionally charged sculptures and mixed media pieces that spoke of yearning, resilience, and the fragile beauty of human connection. The room buzzed with art enthusiasts, critics, and fellow artists, their hushed appreciation a balm to Brenda's artistic spirit. She moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations, explaining her process, her heart swelling with a quiet pride. But a small, persistent void echoed within her, for the one person whose presence she craved most. Patrick had promised he would be there. He'd even set a reminder on his phone, a rare concession to personal events during a particularly brutal quarter. He'd vowed to leave work early, to be by her side, to celebrate this significant milestone. No matter what, B, he'd said, pressing a kiss to her forehead that morning, I'll be there. But as the clock ticked past 7, then 8, then 8:30, his absence became a gaping wound. The texts she'd sent went unread, the calls unanswered, disappearing into the digital void that separated his corporate world from her creative one. Each time the gallery door opened, her gaze would dart expectantly, only to fall each time on another stranger, another well-meaning art lover, never on the familiar silhouette of her husband. Brenda pasted on a brave smile, engaging in conversation, but her focus was fragmented. She saw her reflection in the polished surface of a nearby sculpture, a woman composed, poised, yet with a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. It was a reflection of the longing she'd sculpted, personified. The irony was not lost on her. At 9 o'clock, with the crowd beginning to thin, her phone finally vibrated. It was Patrick. A text. So sorry. B. Major crisis with the Hong Kong acquisition. Had to stay. You know Howard Island. So proud of you. Call you later. The words were a hammer blow. Not because they were unexpected, but because they were so painfully expected. You know Howard Island? Yes. She knew. She knew his work always came first. She knew his crisis was always more pressing than her triumph. She knew, and it hurt with a familiar, searing intensity. She found a quiet corner near her piece, whispers of what was, a delicate intertwined form of two figures just out of reach. She took a deep, shaky breath, fighting back the sting in her eyes. Brenda, you all right? Her gallery owner, Lena, approached, her face etched with concern. Patrick didn't make it? Brenda managed a weak smile. Corporate emergency. You know how it is, she recited, the words tasting like ash. Lena, a warm, perceptive woman who had watched Brenda's career flourish and her personal life subtly dim, just squeezed her arm. It's a beautiful show, Brenda. You should be incredibly proud. I am, Brenda whispered, but her voice cracked. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken understanding. It wasn't just about tonight. It was about every missed dinner, every forgotten anniversary, every moment where she felt like an afterthought to his spreadsheets and board meetings. When she finally arrived home, the loft was dark, save for the soft glow of her studio lights. She discarded her evening dress, the silk feeling like a stranger against her skin, and slipped into an old, comfortable robe. The lamb tagine was still on the stove, cold and congealed, a monument to unfulfilled hopes. She heard the faint click of the front door, then Patrick's quiet footsteps. He entered the living area, briefcase still in hand, his face pale and drawn, his tie askew. He stopped short when he saw her, standing in the middle of the room, her arms crossed, the remnants of glitter from the gallery catching the faint light. Brenda, you're still up. I thought you'd be asleep. His voice was a tired murmur, thick with the strain of his day. I just got home, she replied, her voice flat, devoid of the usual warmth. The The show was a success. Lena sold 3 pieces. He tried to smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. That's fantastic, B. I knew you'd nail it. I'm so sorry I couldn't make it. The Hong Kong team. It was a complete mess. I was stuck on conference calls for hours. I know, she said, her voice rising slightly, tinged with a bitterness she usually suppressed. You told me. You know Howard Island? She took a step closer, the anger finally bubbling to the surface. Do you know how it is, Patrick? To stand there smiling, accepting compliments, while my heart aches for you to just show up? To feel like your work is more important than every single thing we share? His exhaustion seemed to evaporate, replaced by a defensive rigidity. That's not fair, Brenda. My job is demanding. It's how we keep this loft. How we live this life. I'm doing this for us. Is that what this is? She challenged, gesturing around the beautiful, silent space. Is this life? Or is it just 2 people existing in the same expensive apartment, sharing a mortgage, but nothing else? Her voice broke. I don't need the money, Patrick. I need you. I need your presence. Your attention. Your love. He stared at her, his usual calm facade cracking, revealing a flicker of something close to fear. The sculpted silence of their growing distance had finally been shattered, replaced by the raw, painful clang of truth. Beneath the kiln's heat, the shattered silence of the previous night left a raw, exposed nerve in their home. Patrick, uncharacteristically, didn't leave for work immediately. He stood awkwardly in the kitchen, nursing a cold coffee, while Brenda moved through her morning routine with a deliberate, almost exaggerated calm. The chasm between them felt wider than ever, illuminated by the harsh light of their unspoken truths. She retreated to her studio, plunging herself into her work with an almost desperate intensity. The kiln, usually reserved for firing her finished clay pieces, felt like a metaphor for her own emotions, a contained heat threatening to crack under pressure. Days blurred into a week. Patrick made an effort, small, almost imperceptible at first. He'd come home earlier once, only to find Brenda already engrossed in a new sculpture, her back to him, her headphones on. He tried to initiate conversation at dinner, asking about her gallery, about her new projects, but his questions felt formal, like corporate inquiries, and Brenda's answers were clipped, factual, devoid of the usual animated spark. She was still polite, still loving in a distant, habitual way, but the vibrant core of her being, the part that danced and laughed and drew him into her colorful world, seemed to have retreated behind a veil. He watched her, a knot of unease tightening in his stomach. She was a woman transformed by her art, but also by the pain he'd inflicted. Her hands, usually covered in clay, now also kneaded and twisted, almost compulsively, at a complex wire sculpture, sharp edges and delicate curves intertwining, reflecting the turmoil within her. He saw the focus, the passion, but it was a passion directed away from him, channeled into her art as an escape, a balm. One evening, he walked into the studio and found her staring at a half-finished ceramic piece, her brow furrowed, a single tear tracing a clean path through the clay dust on her cheek. She didn't hear him enter, lost in her own thoughts. It was the first time he'd seen her cry in months, a stark reminder of the emotional landscape he'd neglected. His heart ached, a sharp, unfamiliar pain. He had pushed her too far. He, the man who prided himself on control, had lost control of the most important aspect of his life. Brenda? His voice was a soft whisper, almost hesitant. She startled, quickly wiping her face. Patrick, I didn't hear you. Her voice was rough. He stepped closer, the smell of clay and her subtle floral perfume filling his senses. Are you all right? She finally met his gaze, her eyes swollen, but fiercely resolute. No, Patrick, I'm not. I haven't been for a long time. She gestured to the sculpture. This piece, it's stuck. Like us. I can't find a way to make it whole. He reached out, his hand hovering, unsure if he was allowed to touch her. I know I've been distant. I know I messed up. I'm sorry, B. Truly. His voice was raw with unaccustomed vulnerability. I've been so consumed with work, I lost sight of what matters most. Of you. Her gaze softened, a flicker of the old Brenda returning. It's not just about being distant, Patrick. It's about feeling like I don't matter, like your ambition has eclipsed everything else. like I'm just background noise. The words struck him with the force of a physical blow. Background noise. To her, he was the center of her world, her inspiration, her muse. To him, she was his everything. Yet, he had made her feel like a secondary character in their own story. He stepped closer still, his hand finally reaching out to cup her face, his thumb gently wiping away a lingering tear. Her skin was warm, soft, familiar. Never background noise. You're the color in my life, the rhythm in my quiet. Without you, everything island, grayscale. His voice was barely above a whisper, laced with a desperation he rarely allowed himself to show. I'm so lost without you. Their eyes locked, a silent dialogue of pain and longing passing between them. The air in the studio, usually cool and still, now thrummed with a palpable energy, a building heat. The kiln in the corner hummed quietly, a low, persistent thrumming that mirrored the quickening of their pulses. The tension that had defined their interactions for weeks, the emotional conflict, now coalesced into a different kind of pressure. A magnetic pull that promised release. He lowered his head, his gaze sweeping over her lips, her throat, the delicate curve of her collarbone. I miss you, Brenda, he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. I miss us. His breath ghosted over her skin, sending shivers down her spine. The raw vulnerability in his eyes, the genuine pain, broke through the last of her defenses. She had yearned for this, for him to truly see her, to truly want her again. She leaned into his touch, a small, choked sound escaping her lips. I miss you too, Patrick. The words were an admission, a plea. And in that moment, under the low hum of the kiln, surrounded by the tangible expressions of her artistic soul, the dam broke. The need for connection, for physical reassurance, for the raw, undeniable intimacy they had always shared, surged between them, potent and undeniable. The torrent of unspoken yearnings. His lips found hers, not with the gentle, hesitant touch of an apology, but with the raw, desperate hunger of a man who had been starved. It was a kiss that tasted of regret and longing, of weeks of unspoken grievances and simmering desire. Brenda responded with equal fervor, her hands fisting in his shirt, pulling him closer, as if to absorb him entirely. The cool, quiet studio was suddenly alight with the spark of their rediscovered connection. He deepened the kiss, his tongue tracing the curve of her lips, asking for entry, and she granted it without hesitation, her own tongue meeting his in a passionate dance. The world outside, the demanding deadlines, the art critics, the corporate crises, all faded into an indistinct hum. There was only them, only this urgent, primal need to feel, to touch, to be together again. His hands slid from her face to her waist, pulling her flush against him. She felt the hard planes of his body, the defined muscles beneath his shirt, the familiar warmth that had been absent for so long. A soft moan escaped her lips as he pressed himself against her, the undeniable evidence of his arousal, a jolt of pure desire. It was a confirmation of her own longing, a sign that she was not alone in this desperate hunger. Brenda, he breathed against her mouth, his voice hoarse with emotion. God, I need you. His fingers deftly undid the buttons of her paint-splattered blouse, peeling back the fabric to reveal the delicate lace of her bra beneath. His eyes, usually so guarded, were dark with desire, tracing the swell of her breasts. Her own fingers, trembling slightly, reached for his tie, pulling it loose, then working at the buttons of his shirt. She wanted to see him, to feel him, to strip away the corporate armor he wore every day and expose the man beneath, the man she loved, the man who was hers. As his shirt came open, revealing the muscular expanse of his chest, she pressed her face against his skin, inhaling his scent, a comforting mix of his cologne, his natural musk, and a faint hint of office air. It was a scent she had longed for, a scent of home. He kissed her neck, her shoulder, his lips trailing fire across her skin. You're so beautiful, B. So incredibly beautiful. His words, whispered against her skin, were a potent elixir, soothing the sting of neglect that had festered for so long. She arched into his touch, her body alive, humming with an electric current. With a gentle push, He guided her backwards until her back met the cool, smooth surface of a work table, carefully cleared for a new project. She lay there, looking up at him, her eyes wide, with a mixture of desire and vulnerability. He stood over her, his eyes devouring her, his hands unfastening her bra, revealing her breasts, full and aching for his touch. He lowered himself, kneeling between her legs, and took one swollen nipple into his mouth, suckling gently. Then with more urgency, a gasp tore from Brenda's throat, her fingers tangling in his dark hair, pulling him closer. The pleasure was exquisite, an overwhelming flood that threatened to drown out all rational thought. He moved to the other breast, teasing, tasting, drawing out her pleasure until she was writhing beneath him. "Patrick," she moaned, her voice thick with desire. "Please, I need you inside me." He rose, his gaze burning into hers. He quickly shed his remaining clothes, revealing his powerful body, taut and aroused. He unzipped her jeans, his hands sliding inside, warm against her skin, pulling them down along with her underwear. She kicked them away, her legs parting for him. He positioned himself between her thighs, his eyes never leaving hers. "Look at me, Brenda," he murmured, his voice rough with emotion. "I'm here. I'm yours." And then he entered her, slowly, deliberately, filling her completely. A wave of pure, unadulterated sensation washed over Brenda, a deep, satisfying ache that resonated through her very core. She cried out, her body arching upwards, meeting his every thrust. Their movements became a frantic rhythm, a desperate dance of two souls reconnecting, expressing all the unspoken words, all the pent-up frustrations, all the fervent love they had almost lost. He drove into her with an intensity that bordered on fierce, his hips rocking against hers, building the pressure higher and higher. Her nails dug into his back, leaving faint red marks. Each thrust was an affirmation, a promise, a plea. She met his gaze, her eyes swimming with tears of pleasure and release. Finally, with a guttural groan, Patrick surged deep inside her, his body trembling as he found his release. Brenda cried out his name, her own climax washing over her in a breathtaking wave, her muscles contracting around him, pulling him in even deeper. They collapsed together, breathless, slick with sweat, their bodies intertwined, the echoes of their cries still lingering in the quiet studio. The torrent of their unspoken yearnings had found its release, but the underlying currents of their conflict still waited, just beneath the surface, a glimmer through the haze. The morning after was steeped in a fragile, almost reverent quiet. Sunlight streamed through the loft windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air, but failing to dispel the delicate tension that still hung between them. Patrick lay beside Brenda, one arm draped possessively over her waist, his face buried in the curve of her neck. His breathing was deep and even, a stark contrast to the restless thoughts that had plagued her through the night. Brenda traced the line of his jaw with a tentative finger, feeling the slight stubble. The intimacy they had shared last night had been profound, a desperate reclamation of their physical connection, but it felt like a temporary reprieve, a powerful analgesic that numbed the pain without curing the underlying illness. The emotional chasm remained, momentarily bridged by the intensity of their bodies, but still vast and unsettling. He stirred, a soft groan escaping his lips as he stretched, his arm tightening around her. He opened his eyes, blinking slowly, and met her gaze. The dark intensity of last night had softened, replaced by a lingering tenderness and a hint of something else. Guilt, perhaps, or a quiet plea. "Morning," he murmured, his voice still thick with sleep. He leaned in, pressing a soft kiss to her forehead. "Sleep well?" Brenda managed a small smile. "Better than I have in weeks." It wasn't a lie. The physical release had brought a measure of peace, even if it was fleeting. He pulled her closer, their bodies spooning, the warmth of his skin against hers a comforting presence. "Last night," he began, his voice dropping, "it was everything. I'm so sorry, B. For everything." She felt a flicker of hope. Was this it? Was he finally ready to talk? To truly address the issues that had driven them apart? "I know," she whispered, turning in his arms so she could face him. "But everything doesn't fix everything, Patrick. We can't just pretend it didn't happen again." He sighed, his gaze drifting upwards towards the ceiling. I know, and I don't want to. I don't even know where to begin. He ran a hand through his tousled hair, looking utterly spent. Work has been hell. The pressure, it's relentless. I feel like I'm constantly drowning. And if I let go for a second, it all collapses. Brenda nodded slowly, a wave of empathy washing over her. She knew he wasn't making excuses, not entirely. He carried a heavy burden. The weight of responsibility for hundreds of employees, for billions in assets. It was a world utterly foreign to her. A constant, high-stakes game. I understand the pressure, Patrick. I do. But you shut me out. You pushed me away, and I felt so alone. He looked at her again, his eyes filled with a raw sincerity. I never meant to, B. Never. You're the one person I can't live without. But when I'm in that mindset, it's like a tunnel. All I see is the problem, the solution, and everything else, it just fades into the background. Even you. He reached out, taking her hand, intertwining their fingers. It's not that I don't want you there. It's just that I don't know how to bring you into that chaos without dragging you down with me. And you deserve better than that. His admission, the vulnerability in his words, was a glimmer of light through the haze of their conflict. It wasn't a full apology, not a promise to change everything overnight, but it was a recognition, an explanation that finally chipped away at the walls she had built around her heart. I don't need you to shield me from your chaos, Patrick, she said softly, squeezing his hand. I need you to let me in, to let me be your partner, not just your escape, to let me help you carry the burden, even if it's just by listening. He pulled her closer, resting his forehead against hers. I'm so afraid of failing, he admitted, his voice a low, painful murmur, of losing everything we've built, of not being enough. It was a confession of deep-seated insecurity, a side of Patrick she rarely saw, especially in the context of his work. The pragmatic business person, stripped bare, was still human, still vulnerable. They lay there for a long time, simply holding each other, the quiet understanding settling between them like a fragile truce. The words hadn't solved everything, but they had created a space, a small opening, for healing. The air felt lighter, the silence less stifling. It was a beginning, a delicate thread spun from honesty and rediscovered tenderness, holding them together in a world that still demanded their separate battles. But for now, in the warmth of their bed, surrounded by the promise of a new day, it was enough. Shattered clay and broken silence. The fragile truce held for a few days, a delicate dance of rekindled tenderness and cautious communication. Patrick tried harder, coming home at a more reasonable hour, engaging in conversation, even asking Brenda about her upcoming exhibition in Miami. He listened, truly listened, and she in turn softened, letting down some of her guardedness, allowing herself to hope. They even shared a quiet dinner one evening. No phones, just them, the way it used to be. It was a glimpse of their old life, a tantalizing promise. But the corporate beast was relentless. The Hong Kong acquisition, which had been the catalyst for their last major argument, proved to be more complicated and demanding than anticipated. Late-night calls started creeping back in. Distracted glances at his phone during dinner became more frequent. The weight of his work, which had momentarily lifted, settled back onto Patrick's shoulders, heavier than before. Brenda watched it happen, a growing dread tightening her chest. She saw the familiar signs, the furrowed brow, the faraway look in his eyes, the increasing exhaustion. She tried to remind herself of his vulnerability, of his fear of failure. But the hurt, the feeling of being sidelined, began to resurface. She kept herself busy in her studio, pouring her renewed frustration into a new series of pieces, sharp and angular, reflecting the jagged edges of her emotions. The breaking point arrived unexpectedly, brutally. Brenda had been offered a prestigious residency in Rome, a 3-month opportunity to work with a renowned Italian sculptor, a dream opportunity she had been chasing for years. She'd received the confirmation email that afternoon and had been buzzing with excitement, desperate to share the news with Patrick. This was it, a chance for both of them to reconnect, for him to take a break, to join her for part of it, to experience something new together. She waited for him that evening, a special bottle of wine chilling, a celebratory dinner prepared. 9 o'clock came, then 10. At 11, a text arrived. So sorry, B. Stuck in the office. Massive data breach in the HK deal. Might be here all night. Don't wait up. The words hit her like a physical blow. Not just the absence, but the sheer, brutal timing of it. Her dream, her monumental news, completely overshadowed, ignored, forgotten because of his crisis. It felt like a deliberate act, though she knew it wasn't a symbol of everything that had gone wrong. Something inside her snapped. She stood in the middle of her studio, the confirmation email still open on her iPad, and stared at the unfinished sculpture of longing she'd revisited, now imbued with fresh frustration. With a choked cry, she grabbed a heavy clay mallet and, in a fit of despair, brought it down hard on the delicate form. The clay shattered, scattering fragments across the floor, a cloud of dust rising around her, mirroring the dust clouding her vision from unshed tears. When Patrick finally stumbled through the door at 3 a.m., looking like a ghost, he found Brenda sitting amidst the shattered remnants of her art, her face streaked with clay and tears, the silence of the loft more deafening than any scream. The wine was unopened, the dinner untouched. He froze, his eyes widening in horror at the devastation. Brenda? What happened here? He looked from the broken sculpture to her tear-streaked face. She looked up at him, her eyes blazing with a fury he rarely saw. What happened? She spat, her voice raw, trembling with barely suppressed emotion. You happened, Patrick. Your precious, all-consuming work happened. She rose, slowly, deliberately, the broken clay crunching under her bare feet. I got the residency, Patrick. Rome, 3 months. A dream come true. She pointed to the iPad. I waited for you. I cooked for you. I wanted to celebrate with you. Her voice rose, thick with pain. But you were too busy. Too busy for us. He stared, aghast. Rome? Brenda? That's incredible. I'm so sorry. I had no idea. But the data breach, it was critical. Our stock could have plummeted. Our reputation. Don't you dare, she hissed, cutting him off, her voice finally breaking. Don't you dare bring up your stock. Don't you dare bring up your reputation. What about our reputation? What about our love? You've been so busy building your empire, you've completely dismantled ours. Tears streamed down her face now, hot and unstoppable. I am so tired, Patrick. So tired of being secondary to your ledgers, so tired of being an afterthought to your crises. I feel like I'm screaming into a void and you can't even hear me because you're deafened by the demands of your job. He took a step towards her, his face a mask of shock and pain. Brenda, please. That's not true. You're everything to me. Then show me, she cried, her voice echoing in the silent loft. Don't just say it. Show me. Because all I see is a man who loves his work more than he loves his wife. All I see is a man who is terrified of failure at the office, but completely oblivious to the fact that he's failing us. He's failing me. She gestured wildly at the shattered clay around them. This is us, Patrick. Broken. Fragmented. Because you've chiseled away at me until there's nothing left but dust. Patrick stood there, speechless, the words hitting him with devastating force. He looked at the shattered clay, at Brenda's raw, pain-filled face, and for the first time, truly understood the depth of the damage he had caused. The silence was broken, utterly, painfully, and in its place was the echoing sound of their love, shattering into 1,000 pieces, reforged in embers. The words hung in the air, sharp as shards of glass, amidst the literal shards of Brenda's art. Patrick stared at her, utterly devastated. The corporate crisis that had consumed his night now paling into insignificance beside the raw, bleeding wound he had inflicted on his wife, on their life. Her accusation, he's failing me, reverberated in his ears, a chilling, undeniable truth. He took a shaky breath, the fight draining from him, replaced by a profound, agonizing realization. This was not just a misunderstanding. This was a chasm he had inadvertently carved. He had been so focused on protecting their future, on building a secure foundation, that he had neglected the very structure of their present. Brenda, he began, his voice hoarse, stripped of all arrogance and defense. You're right. You're absolutely right. He looked around at the destroyed sculpture, a tangible representation of her pain. I haven't just been failing us. I've been destroying us. I let my fear, my drive, blind me to what truly matters. He sank to his knees amidst the scattered clay, reaching for her hands. His own were trembling. I am so sorry. For the missed exhibition. For this residency. For every single time I made you feel less than. For making you feel alone. Brenda pulled her hands away, her eyes still wary, but the fury had drained, replaced by a bone-deep weariness. Apologies aren't enough, Patrick. Not anymore. I know, he whispered, his gaze pleading. And I'm not asking for forgiveness right now. I'm asking for a chance to prove it, to show you that I can be the man you married, the man you deserve. He pulled out his phone. The data breach can wait. My team can handle it. My career means nothing without you, without us. With a decisive, deliberate movement, he powered it off, the screen going black, a symbolic severing of the tie that had bound him to his corporate prison. He looked at her, his eyes filled with a desperate conviction. I'm not going to roam with you. I'm going to learn from you. I want to understand your world. I want to be present, truly present. Not just physically, but emotionally. He stood slowly, then reached for her, gently pulling her into his arms. This time, there was no demanding passion, only a profound, tender embrace, a silent promise. Brenda stiffened at first, then slowly, hesitantly, sagged against him, her tears soaking his shirt. She was exhausted, emotionally drained, but in his desperate sincerity, in the genuine tremor of his body, she felt a flicker of hope, a warmth reigniting in the embers of their shattered love. The next few days were a revelation. Patrick, true to his word, cleared his schedule. He spent hours in Brenda's studio, not working, not on his phone, but simply watching her. He asked questions, real questions, about her process, about the meaning behind her art, about the emotions she poured into her work. He listened intently, absorbing her world, seeing the beauty and complexity he had overlooked for so long. He helped her clean up the shattered clay, his large, practical hands carefully sweeping up the pieces, a quiet act of penitence. One afternoon, he found her sketching designs for a new project, a complex, intertwined sculpture that spoke of connection and resilience. He sat beside her, simply observing. She looked up, met his gaze, and a soft, genuine smile touched her lips. "This one," she said. "It's about rebuilding, about finding strength in vulnerability." He reached for her hand, his thumb tracing the calluses on her fingers, battle scars from her artistic passion. "Let me help you build it," he murmured, his voice filled with a quiet intensity. "Let me help you rebuild us." Later that day, they found themselves not in their bedroom, but in Brenda's studio. The soft, diffuse light of late afternoon filtered through the windows, painting the room in hues of gold and amber. He had cleared a space on the large work table, spreading a soft blanket. The air was still thick with the scent of clay and oil paint, but now it also held the promise of healing. Patrick moved towards her, his eyes filled with a tenderness that made her heart ache. He reached out, cupping her face, and kissed her, a slow, deep kiss that was full of quiet devotion. It was not the desperate hunger of before, but a kiss of profound understanding, of reconnection. He undressed her slowly, reverently, his hands tracing every curve, every line of her body, as if rediscovering a precious work of art. She did the same for him, her fingers lingering on the scars of his ambition, the tension in his shoulders, the faint lines around his eyes. This time it wasn't about release, but about affirmation. When he laid her down on the blanket, their eyes locked, a silent conversation passing between them. He knelt above her, his gaze sweeping over her face. "Brenda," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I swear to you, I will never let you feel like background noise again. You are my masterpiece, my everything." He entered her slowly, his movements deliberate, controlled, filled with an exquisite gentleness. She gasped, her body arching into his, meeting him with an equal measure of tenderness and longing. Each thrust was a question, a promise, a soft, whispered declaration of love. He wasn't just taking pleasure, he was giving it, receiving it, sharing it, in a profound, intimate communion. "I love you, Patrick," she murmured, her voice choked with emotion, tears tracking down her temples. "I never stopped." "And you, my artist," he responded, his voice breaking. "More than words can say, more than any ledger can quantify." He leaned down, kissing her deeply, pouring all his love, all his regret, all his renewed commitment into the embrace. Their movements became a slow, deliberate dance, a rhythm of healing and reclamation. They moved together seamlessly, two halves of a whole, reforged in the embers of their conflict, stronger and more vibrant than before. Their cries, when they came, were not of desperation, but of pure, unadulterated joy. A symphony of two souls finally finding their way back home. The masterpiece of us. The weeks that followed, the great unraveling and their raw studio floor reclamation, were a testament to the enduring power of love, commitment, and most importantly, intentional presence. Patrick, true to his word, had undergone a profound shift. His phone, once an extension of his hand, now spent significant time tucked away in a drawer, silencing the incessant demands of his corporate life. He delegated more, set firmer boundaries, and for the first time in years, truly disconnected when he walked through their loft door. He didn't abandon his career, but he redefined his relationship with it. He still worked hard, but he worked smarter, more efficiently, and always with a conscious awareness of Brenda, of them. He started coming home for dinner almost every night, even if it was just to share a simple meal she'd prepared, or to help her cook. The conversations were no longer perfunctory recaps of his day, but genuine exchanges filled with laughter, questions, and the easy intimacy they had once taken for granted. Brenda, in turn, blossomed. The weight of neglect had lifted, replaced by the buoyancy of feeling seen, heard, and cherished. She felt inspired again, her art taking on new dimensions, infused with a renewed sense of hope and connection. The longing sculpture, once shattered, was carefully reassembled, given new life with gold leaf tracing the cracks, a beautiful testament to repair and resilience. He started joining her in the studio, not to critique or advise, but to simply be near her. He'd read while she sculpted, or occasionally hand her a tool, his quiet presence, a grounding force. One afternoon, she found him sketching in a notebook, attempting to capture the intricate details of a piece she was working on. He sheepishly admitted he'd always been fascinated by her artistic process, but had been too afraid to dabble himself. She smiled, took his hand, and guided it over a lump of clay, showing him how to shape and mold. He discovered a surprising, quiet satisfaction in the tactile experience, a different kind of creation than his world of numbers and mergers. Brenda decided to accept the Rome residency, but not without Patrick's full, enthusiastic support. "Go, B," he'd insisted, his eyes sparkling with genuine pride. "This is your dream. I'll fly out to visit as often as I can. And when I can't, we'll talk every single day. We'll make it work, because we make it work now." His confidence, untainted by the shadow of his own work, was a profound gift. Their love life, too, had transformed. The desperate hunger of their reunion had mellowed into a deep, abiding tenderness. Their intimacy was no longer a frantic search for connection amidst emotional wreckage, but a joyful celebration, a profound communion of two souls deeply entwined. One quiet Sunday morning, they lay in bed, sunlight streaming across their bare limbs. The city sounds muted below them. Brenda traced the lines of his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her palm. He was reading aloud from a book of poetry she loved, his voice a low, soothing rumble that resonated deep within her. He put the book down, turning to face her, his eyes warm with affection. "I never truly understood what it meant to live, Brenda," he confessed, pulling her closer. "I was always chasing the next goal, the next achievement, ticking off boxes. You've taught me how to feel, how to breathe, how to simply be." She smiled, pressing a kiss to his lips. "And you, my pragmatist, have shown me that even the most chaotic artistic life needs a strong foundation. You've taught me how to be grounded without losing my wings." He looked at her, his gaze sweeping over her face, still smudged with a faint speck of ochre from her morning's work, and the love in his eyes was palpable, a masterpiece in itself. He reached out, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, then leaned in for a slow, deep kiss, a celebration of their renewed bond. It was a kiss that spoke of quiet joy, of deep understanding, of a future they would build together, brick by brushstroke. Later, as they showered together, the warm water cascading over their bodies, his hands moved over her with a gentle possessiveness, her own hands gliding over his back, pressing against his muscled frame. There was no urgency now, only a soft, lingering desire that underscored their connection. He pulled her close under the spray, her back against his chest, and she leaned into him, feeling utterly safe, utterly loved. They were not just a couple anymore. They were a completed work of art, a masterpiece forged from fire and love, resilience and understanding. The end. We hope you enjoyed that tale. Our next story begins now. Story 2. Mending the Canvas. The Unfinished Sketch. Jerry Roberts stared at the colossal steel skeleton reaching for the sky outside his office window. A monument to his ambition and the current source of his relentless exhaustion. The Riverbend Revitalization Project was his magnum opus, a multi-use urban development poised to transform the city's waterfront. Millions of dollars, countless jobs, and his entire professional reputation were tethered to its successful completion. He was an architect turned developer, a man who built not just structures, but legacies. And right now, that legacy felt like it was crushing him. His phone buzzed, vibrating insistently against the polished oak of his desk. He glanced at the caller ID. Ava Bell. A familiar pang, a mixture of warmth and guilt, tightened in his chest. Ava. His Ava. Vibrant, chaotic, brilliant Ava. She was everything he wasn't. An artist, a free spirit whose canvases pulsed with the raw emotion he often kept locked away. He loved her fiercely, a love that had burned brightly in their youth, flickered out amidst his early career demands, and then miraculously rekindled a year ago. He let it ring, knowing he couldn't offer her the full, present attention she deserved. He was still mentally reviewing the structural integrity reports, running numbers for the investor pitch due next week. He'd call her back. Later, when his brain wasn't a tangled mess of steel beams and budget overruns. Across town, in a loft studio bathed in the soft, diffused light of a late afternoon, Ava Bell held a brush poised over a canvas. It was a large piece, a swirling abstract landscape of deep blues and fiery oranges, but it felt stuck, just like she felt. Her phone lay abandoned on a paint-splattered stool, its final buzz a dull echo in the cavernous space. Jerry hadn't answered. Again, a sigh escaped her, a sound heavy with a familiar ache. Their reunion had been a whirlwind, a joyous rediscovery of a connection she thought lost forever. The spark had never truly died, only smoldered. But lately, the smoke of old patterns was starting to sting her eyes. Jerry was always busy, always stressed, always just 5 more minutes or I'll call you right back. She dipped her brush, but the vibrant orange seemed to lose its fire. This painting, intended to capture the electric energy of their rekindled love, was becoming a portrait of her growing anxiety. She remembered the early days of their first relationship, how his ambition, once so attractive, had slowly eclipsed everything else, including her. He'd become a phantom, present in body but absent in spirit, until one day he was simply gone, leaving her with a bitter taste of being second to his career. Now, it felt like history was repeating itself. He'd been late for dinner 3 nights this week, missed their regular Sunday brunch, and last night, when she'd tried to talk to him about it, he'd just grunted, eyes glued to his laptop, muttering something about a critical deadline. Ava, I'm literally saving $1 million right now. Can this wait? She knew he worked hard. She admired his drive. But her soul craved connection, not just convenience. She needed to feel seen, to feel prioritized. As an artist, her work flowed from her emotions. And right now, her emotional well was running dry, tainted by an insecurity she thought they'd banished. Later that evening, Jerry finally called. His voice was tired, strained. Hey, babe. So, sorry. Crazy day. It always is, isn't it? She replied, trying to keep the edge out of her tone, but failing. A beat of silence. Look, I know I've been a little preoccupied. This project, it's massive. It's everything. Is it more everything than us, Jerry? The words slipped out, sharp and sudden. He sighed, a sound that grated on her nerves. That's not fair, Ava. You know how much I love you. You know how important you are. Do I? Her voice cracked slightly. Because sometimes it feels like I'm just another appointment in your calendar, one you can reschedule if something more important comes up. That's not true, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. He was already multitasking, she could tell. He was probably checking emails. You know what? Forget it, she said, her chest tightening. I'm just tired. Let's just talk tomorrow. When you're not saving $1 million. She hung up before he could respond, a familiar and unwelcome coldness settling in her heart. The unfinished sketch of their future together felt increasingly fragile, its lines blurred, its colors fading. She wished she could just paint over the past, but the ghosts of old hurts were stubbornly bleeding through. The shattered palette. The following Saturday was meant to be their escape. Ava had meticulously planned a surprise weekend getaway to a cabin upstate, nestled beside a quiet lake. No cell service, no Wi-Fi, just them, the forest, and a chance to breathe. She'd even packed a small, portable easel and a new set of watercolors, hoping to capture the serenity she so desperately craved. The car was packed. A picnic basket brimming with artisanal cheeses and a bottle of their favorite Pinot Noir sat on the passenger seat. All she needed was Jerry. He was supposed to be at her studio by 10 a.m. At 10:30 she called. No answer. At 11, she tried again. Straight to voicemail. A knot of dread tightened in her stomach. By 11:45, a cold certainty began to seep in. He wasn't coming. The bright morning sun, once full of promise, now felt mocking. She walked over to her easel, the unfinished abstract still staring back at her. Her vibrant colors suddenly felt garish, hollow. With a frustrated cry, she grabbed a thick, dark tube of paint, midnight blue, almost black, and smeared it across the canvas, obliterating the hopeful oranges and blues. It wasn't art. It was an act of pure, visceral despair. Just as a tear traced a path through the paint on her cheek, her phone buzzed. Jerry? Ava! Hey! Oh my God, I am so sorry. I totally lost track of time. This presentation. It's next Tuesday, and the architect just sent over some revised renderings that totally screw up the structural load. I'm literally in the office right now, trying to recalculate everything. I can't leave. His voice was rushed, frantic, but devoid of the genuine remorse she needed to hear. It sounded like an explanation, not an apology. You forgot, she stated, her voice dangerously calm. You forgot our weekend. The one I planned? The one I told you about last week? The one we talked about? No, I didn't forget. It slipped my mind with all this pressure. Ava, this is huge. My career, everything, depends on this. If these numbers are wrong, the whole project could be delayed, or worse, canceled. And what about us, Jerry? She yelled, the carefully constructed calm shattering. What about us? Is that just a secondary project you can get to when you have time? Something that can be delayed indefinitely? Don't be dramatic, Ava. You know how much you mean to me. Do I? Because it feels like I mean absolutely nothing. It feels like I'm screaming into a void while you're off building your empire, completely oblivious to everything else. Her voice rose, raw, with years of pent-up hurt. This is exactly what happened before, isn't it? You get swallowed by your work. You become a ghost. And I'm left here, waiting for scraps of your attention. Until eventually, there's nothing left. A silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken accusations and the bitter taste of their past. That's not fair, he said, his voice now tight with defensiveness. I am under immense pressure. I can't just drop everything for a weekend trip right now. This is my life, Ava. This is our future. Our future? She scoffed, a humorless laugh escaping her lips. What future, Jerry? One where I'm constantly competing with steel and concrete? One where I'm always on the sidelines, watching you live your life, while mine just stalls? You're being unreasonable. And you're being exactly who you were 10 years ago, she retorted, tears finally streaming down her face, washing away the paint. You're distant, you're unreachable, and you're making me feel utterly, completely alone. She heard him try to say something, but she couldn't listen anymore. The words were a torrent now, fueled by disappointment and the agonizing fear of history repeating itself. I can't do this again, Jerry. I just can't. And then, before he could respond, she hung up, the sharp click echoing in the desolate silence of her studio. Her palette lay shattered, figuratively and almost literally, reflecting the broken pieces of her heart. The packed car, the picnic basket, the new watercolors, they all felt like cruel jokes, monuments to a hope that had just been brutally extinguished. Whispers in the gloaming. The hours that followed were a blur of numb activity. Ava unpacked the car, put away the picnic, and stared at the ruined canvas. Her anger slowly curdling into a profound sadness. She wasn't angry at Jerry anymore. She was heartbroken for both of them, for the love that felt like it was slipping through her fingers again. She began to pack a different bag, not for a romantic getaway, but for a temporary retreat. She needed space, time to think, to protect herself from a pain that felt too familiar. The doorbell chimed, a hesitant, almost apologetic sound. She froze, then ignored it. It chimed again, more insistent. She knew it was him. She didn't want to see him. Not like this. Not when her heart felt like a raw wound. The chiming stopped, replaced by a soft, repeated thud against the door. He wasn't leaving. Reluctantly, she pulled herself up and peered through the peephole. Jerry stood there, looking utterly exhausted, his usually impeccable hair disheveled, his eyes heavy with worry. He wasn't in his work clothes. He was wearing the faded t-shirt and worn jeans she loved, the clothes he wore when he was truly comfortable, truly himself. She opened the door just a crack. What do you want, Jerry? Her voice was flat, devoid of emotion. His shoulders slumped. To talk, to apologize, to beg if I have to. He held up a crumpled bag. I brought pizza, your favorite. She looked at the bag, then at him. He looked genuinely distraught, not just stressed. The usual bravado was gone, replaced by a raw vulnerability that momentarily disarmed her. I don't want pizza, she said, but she opened the door wider, letting him in. He stepped inside, his gaze immediately going to the marred canvas. Oh, Ava, he whispered, a tremor in his voice. I did that, didn't I? She didn't answer, just turned away, walking towards the suitcase she'd started to pack. Where are you going? He asked, his voice laced with panic. Away. I need to clear my head. I can't be here, feeling like this, anymore. He took a hesitant step towards her. Please don't. Not like this. I screwed up, Ava. I really truly screwed up. He reached for her, his hand hovering over her arm, unsure if he was allowed to touch. She flinched slightly, but didn't pull away completely. You don't just screw up a whole weekend, Jerry. Not when you know how much it meant to me. Not when you know our history. He nodded slowly, his eyes fixed on her. I know. And that's what terrifies me. I saw it on your face, Ava. I heard it in your voice. You looked at me like I was him again. The guy who broke your heart. The guy who chose work over you. His honesty pierced through her anger. A tiny crack in the wall she'd built. Because you were that guy, Jerry, she whispered, her voice choked. You were becoming him again. And it hurt so much because I thought we were past that. I thought you were past that. He finally touched her arm, his fingers warm, a tentative comfort. I'm not past it. I'm drowning, Ava. This project, it's not just a project. It's everything I've worked for, everything I've dreamed of since I was a kid sketching buildings in my notebook. And there have been so many roadblocks, so many moments where I thought it was all going to fall apart. I've been terrified of failing, terrified of losing everything. And I pushed you away because I didn't want you to see me like this. I didn't want you to see me fail. He looked at her, his eyes glistening. I thought if I just locked myself away, if I just worked hard enough, I could fix it all on my own. But all I did was mess up the only thing that actually matters. He pulled her gently into his arms, and this time, she didn't resist. His embrace was tight, desperate, his head resting against her hair. You're not secondary, Ava. You're my anchor, my grounding. The reason I want to build a better life, a beautiful future. You're everything. His words, raw and unpolished, resonated deep within her. She felt the tremor in his body, the genuine fear and exhaustion emanating from him. He wasn't just stressed, he was on the verge of breaking. And in that moment, the anger dissipated, replaced by a profound empathy and a surge of love that had never truly left. The sun had long set, plunging the studio into a soft, intimate gloom, the only light filtering in from the city below, casting long shadows. It was in this gloaming, amidst whispers of confession and the ghost of old pain, that their bodies began to gravitate towards each other, drawn by an undeniable need for solace, for connection, for the desperate hope that they could mend what was broken. The tension in the air was thick, no longer with anger, but with an agonizing, almost unbearable anticipation of touch. The blazing ochre, his hand, still trembling slightly, moved from her arm to cup her face. His thumb brushed a tear from her cheek, smudging a streak of midnight blue paint. Her eyes, wide and luminous in the dim light, met his. There was no anger there now, only a mirroring of his own vulnerability, a deep, aching desire for understanding. "I'm so sorry, Ava," he whispered, his voice hoarse, his lips just inches from hers. "For everything. For making you feel alone. For making you doubt us." "I know," she breathed, her own voice barely audible. "I know you are." His gaze dropped to her mouth, lingered there for a beat. Then he leaned in, slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. But she didn't. Instead, she leaned in too, meeting him halfway. Their lips met, a tentative, almost reverent touch that quickly deepened into a desperate, hungry kiss. It wasn't gentle. It was raw, urgent, fueled by the emotional storm they had just weathered. His arms wrapped around her waist, pulling her flush against his hard body, a shudder running through him as their hips met. Her hands rose, tangling in his disheveled hair, holding him close, as if she could fuse their souls together through the sheer force of their embrace. He tasted of desperation and lingering anxiety, but also of love, a deep, abiding love that had never truly vanished. She kissed him back with equal fervor, opening her mouth, inviting him deeper. His tongue plunged inside, exploring, seeking, and a moan escaped her, a sound of relief and surrender. He lifted her effortlessly, her legs wrapping instinctively around his waist, her body molding against his. He carried her towards the bedroom, leaving a trail of discarded pizza boxes and scattered art supplies in their wake. He lowered her gently onto the bed, but their lips never parted. Their clothes became an impedance, tugged off in a frantic dance of hands and mouths. The silk of her blouse, the denim of his jeans, fell to the floor in a tangled heap. When their skin finally met, his warm, strong, roughened by work, hers soft, sensitive, still tasting of paint, a gasp escaped them both. It was an electric shock, a reconnection of circuits that had been overloaded and dangerously close to shorting out. His hands roamed her body, tracing familiar curves, eliciting shivers and soft cries. He worshipped her with his touch, his lips following the path of his hands, over her collarbone, down her throat, pausing to nip gently at her earlobe. "You are so beautiful, Ava," he murmured, his voice thick with desire. "So incredibly beautiful." She arched into him, her fingers digging into the muscles of his back, desperate for more. "Jerry," she whimpered, her hips beginning to undulate against his, a silent plea. He understood. He moved between her legs, the hard ridge of his erection pressing against her already damp core, a promise of the release they both craved. He pushed slowly, carefully, watching her face as he entered her, a low groan rumbling in his chest. Her eyes fluttered shut, a sigh of pure bliss escaping her lips as she felt him fill her completely. It was familiar, yet utterly new, imbued with the weight of their confessions, the pain of their near loss, and the overwhelming relief of finding their way back to this fundamental connection. "Look at me, Ava," he whispered, his voice husky. Her eyes opened, finding his. In their depths, she saw not just lust, but adoration, regret, and a fierce, protective love. "I love you," she said, the words a breathless affirmation. "I love you too, my artist," he replied. And then he began to move, slowly at first, then with increasing urgency, their bodies finding a rhythm as old as time itself. Each thrust was a plea, a promise, a desperate attempt to bridge the emotional chasm that had opened between them. Her legs tightened around him, pulling him deeper, their moans mingling in the twilight, a symphony of need and raw passion. The blazing ochre of their passion consumed them, burning away the pain, at least for this moment, leaving only the exquisite fire of their joined bodies. The soft hues of dawn. The first light of dawn filtered through the studio windows, casting a gentle, ethereal glow on the bed. They lay tangled together, limbs intertwined, bodies still humming with the aftershocks of their intense passion. Jerry's arm was draped protectively over Ava's waist, his breath soft, and even against her hair. She was nestled against him, her head tucked under his chin, feeling the steady beat of his heart. A fragile peace had settled over them, a temporary truce bought with shared intimacy and whispered confessions. He had held her through the night, murmuring apologies and assurances against her skin. "I'll do better, I promise. I'll make time. You're my priority." His words were soft, heartfelt, and in the quiet aftermath, she wanted to believe them with every fiber of her being. She traced the line of his jaw with her fingertip, feeling the slight stubble. He stirred, a low rumble in his chest, and then his eyes slowly opened, finding hers. A soft smile touched his lips, genuine and warm. "Morning," he whispered, his voice still heavy with sleep. "Morning," she replied, a faint smile gracing her own lips. He tightened his arm around her, pulling her closer. "Sleep well? Like a baby," she admitted, the tension that had gripped her for days finally starting to ease. "You? Better than I have in weeks." He kissed the top of her head. "I really am sorry, Ava, for everything, for being such an idiot." She leaned up, pressing a soft kiss to his lips. "It's okay. We'll figure it out." But even as she said the words, a tiny, almost imperceptible flicker of doubt stirred within her. The core issues, his work stress, her lingering insecurity, were like shadows at the edges of the room, held at bay by the soft hues of dawn and the warmth of their embrace, but still there. They hadn't truly dissected the why of their past, or the concrete how of preventing a repeat. His promises, while sincere, felt a little vague, unspoken commitments made in the throes of emotion. They lay for a long time, just holding each other, enjoying the quiet comfort. Eventually, the need for coffee stirred them. As Jerry moved to get up, his phone, which he'd left on the nightstand, buzzed. He glanced at it, and she saw the familiar tightening in his jaw, the subtle shift in his gaze. It was a work notification, probably an email from his team. "Just a quick check," he murmured, reaching for it. Ava's stomach clenched. "Jerry?" He looked at her, then back at the phone, then back at her. A moment of internal conflict played out on his face. He visibly hesitated. Then, slowly, deliberately, he put the phone face down on the nightstand. "It can wait," he said, his voice firm. "You can't." A wave of relief washed over her, and she smiled, genuinely this time. "Good answer." He chuckled, pulling her back into his arms for another kiss. "Coffee first, then maybe we can finally have that breakfast." It was a small victory, a tiny step in the right direction. But the gesture, the conscious choice, meant more to her than he could probably imagine. It offered a glimmer of hope that this time, perhaps, things would be different. The soft hues of dawn promised a new day, but the lingering shadows hinted at the deeper conversations they still needed to have. The unveiling of shadows. For the next few days, Jerry tried. He really did. He made an effort to be present, to put his phone away, to listen when Ava spoke. He even brought her coffee in bed one morning and watched her paint for an hour, genuinely interested in her process. The Riverbend project loomed, his big presentation a few days away. But he was visibly trying to juggle. Then came the call. It was late afternoon. They were having a quiet dinner at Ava's studio, enjoying a rare moment of calm. His phone rang, a persistent, urgent trill. He saw the caller ID, his lead engineer. His face immediately tightened, the hard lines of stress returning. He started to reach for it, but Ava's hand shot out, gently but firmly covering his. "Jerry," she said, her voice soft but unwavering. He hesitated, his gaze locked on her. "It could be important, Ava. This is crunch time." "More important than us?" she challenged, her voice still quiet, but with an underlying steel he recognized. He pulled his hand away from hers, a flicker of irritation in his eyes, but he didn't pick up the phone. It continued to ring, a relentless reminder of the world beyond their small, fragile bubble. The tension in the room ratcheted up, palpable and suffocating. Finally, the ringing stopped. He let out a frustrated sigh, running a hand through his hair. Ava, you don't understand the pressure I'm under. This project is at a critical juncture. One wrong move, one missed call, and it could all implode. And one missed connection with me, Jerry. And we could implode, she retorted, her voice rising now. Do you hear yourself? You just went from 0 to 60 in 2 seconds flat. That's the exact same switch I saw a decade ago. The switch that turns you from my loving partner into a stressed-out robot who only cares about his next deadline? He flinched as if struck. That's not fair. I'm doing this for us, for our future, for the life we talked about. What life, Jerry? She cried, pushing back from the table. A life where you're constantly chasing the next big thing, and I'm left chasing you? A life where I'm always waiting for you to finish your important work before you can be present for me? Her voice cracked with emotion. I can't live like that again. I barely survived it the first time. I spent years picking up the pieces of my heart, telling myself I wasn't enough, that my needs were trivial compared to your grand ambitions. And now, seeing you slip back into that pattern, it's terrifying. It hurts, Jerry. It hurts more than you know. Tears streamed down her face, hot and stinging. I need you to tell me, truly tell me, if you can actually be here, if you can balance your ambition with a real, present partnership. Because if you can't, if this is going to be our cycle, then I can't do it. My heart can't take it. His face, which had been defensive a moment ago, crumpled. He looked utterly devastated. The fight seemed to drain out of him, replaced by a profound weariness. He pushed his own chair back, standing to face her. Ava, he said, his voice raw, stripped bare. It's not that I don't want to be here. It's that I'm terrified. I lost everything once, when the market crashed right after my first big venture. I worked so hard, gave up so much, and it all just evaporated. The shame, the failure, it nearly broke me. This project, it's my chance to prove myself, to secure a future where I don't have to worry like that again. A future where I can give you everything you deserve. He walked towards her, his eyes pleading, an honesty in them that cut her to the bone. I know I pull away. It's a defense mechanism. I try to shoulder all the pressure myself because I don't want to burden you, to drag you down with my stress. I thought I was protecting you by putting up walls, by not letting you see me at my most vulnerable, my most frantic. I thought I was protecting you from my potential failure. But all I've done is push you away, and that's the biggest failure of all. He reached out, cupping her face, his thumbs gently wiping her tears. You're right. I've been a ghost. And I've been a fool. Because the one thing that actually makes all of this worth it, the one thing that gives me strength and perspective, is you. And I've been so busy trying not to fail at work, that I was failing at us. The one thing I absolutely cannot afford to lose. The raw truth of his confession hung in the air, unveiling the shadows of his past. The insecurities that drove his relentless ambition. It wasn't about not loving her. It was about his own deep-seated fears. And in that moment, the last of Ava's defenses crumbled. She saw him not as the work-obsessed phantom of her past, but as a man desperately trying to protect himself and those he loved, albeit in a tragically misguided way, painting new horizons. The weight of their confessions hung heavy in the air, but it was a cleansing weight, like a storm that had finally broken. Ava pulled Jerry into a tight embrace, burying her face in his shoulder. She could feel the tremor in his body, the genuine fear and relief pouring out of him. You don't have to carry it all alone, Jerry, she whispered, her voice muffled against his shirt. You don't have to protect me from your struggles. We're a team. We're in this together. He held her tighter, a ragged breath escaping him. I know, he murmured. I'm not good at asking for help. Not good at letting people in when I'm under pressure. Well, you're going to have to learn, she said, pulling back slightly to look into his eyes, a soft, tearful smile on her face. Because I'm not going anywhere. But I need you to let me in. All of you. The stressed out, terrified, brilliant you just as much as the charming, loving you. He nodded, his gaze unwavering. I will. I promise. I don't want to lose you again. I can't. She took his hand, her fingers intertwining with his. A silent pact. Good. Because I don't want to lose you either. Later, much later, As the city lights twinkled outside her studio window, painting the night with abstract patterns, they found themselves back in her studio space. Not the bedroom. The ruined canvas, still smeared with dark paint, stood on its easel, a stark reminder of their emotional journey. "Maybe we should paint over it," Jerry suggested, his voice soft, as he watched her pick up a new brush. Ava shook her head. "Number. We mend it. We add to it. We let it be a testament to what we've overcome." She looked at him, her eyes shining with a new resolve. "Help me?" He smiled, a genuine, unburdened smile that made her heart ache with love. Always. He helped her clean the brushes, set out fresh tubes of paint. There was a quiet intimacy in their shared task, a new kind of connection blossoming between them. As she mixed a vibrant cerulean blue with a touch of iridescent silver, he watched her, truly watched her, his presence calm and engaged. Then he leaned in, his lips brushing her ear. "You know this studio? It's beautiful, Ava. It always feels like a reflection of your soul." She leaned back into him, enjoying the warmth of his body. "It's my sanctuary." He turned her gently to face him, his hands cupping her face. "Make love to me, Ava," he whispered, his eyes full of a love that was deeper, more profound than anything they'd shared before. "Here, now, on your sanctuary. Let's paint new horizons together." Her heart swelled. This wasn't about urgent desire, but about reaffirmation, about claiming their space, their future. She nodded. A soft, breathless yes. He kissed her, slowly at first, then with increasing passion, carrying her in his arms and laying her gently on the large, paint-splattered drop cloth that covered the floor. The canvas stood nearby, a silent witness to their love. This time, their lovemaking was a dance of healing, of deep reassurance. Every touch was a promise, every kiss a whispered affirmation. He explored her body with a reverence that brought tears to her eyes, his lips tracing patterns on her skin, murmuring, "You are enough, more than enough. You're my world." She clung to him, meeting his intensity with her own, her fingers running through his hair over his strong shoulders. "I trust you," she whispered, the words a balm to his soul. "I trust us." He entered her slowly, their eyes locked, communicating a depth of emotion that transcended words. It was a joining of not just bodies, but of souls, a reclamation of their bond after the raw honesty that had unveiled their deepest fears. Each thrust was a reassurance, a rebuilding of the foundation they had almost let crumble. Their shared moans filled the studio, not of desperate hunger, but of profound contentment, of coming home. In this sacred space, surrounded by the tools of her art, they were painting a new future, brushstroke by brushstroke, a vibrant landscape of shared understanding and unwavering love. The masterpiece unfolds. In the weeks that followed, the changes were subtle but profound. Jerry still worked hard, but he learned to delegate, to set boundaries. His phone calls were no longer sacrosanct. He'd put it away during their meals, during their evenings. He scheduled specific Ava time in his calendar, and he honored it. He even started coming to her studio in the afternoons, not to work, but just to sit and watch her paint, sometimes reading, sometimes just existing in her creative space. He started to see his work not as a solitary battle, but as a part of the larger, richer tapestry of his life, a life that now included Ava, truly included her in all its facets. Ava, in turn, learned to voice her fears without immediately retreating, to lean into his vulnerability. She saw the genuine effort he was making, and her heart softened, blooming anew. The ruined canvas now stood in a corner of the studio, no longer a symbol of despair, but a testament to their resilience. Ava had started a new piece, a large, joyful composition exploding with color, a tribute to their rekindled hope. The day of Jerry's crucial presentation arrived. Ava was there, sitting in the front row of the crowded auditorium, a quiet anchor in the sea of suits and strained faces. He caught her eye across the room, and she gave him a small, encouraging smile. His presentation was flawless, a powerful articulation of his vision, and he delivered it with a confidence that soared. When the applause erupted, he sought her out again, his gaze lingering on her for a moment longer than anyone else, a silent acknowledgement of their shared victory. A few months later, Ava held her own exhibition. The gallery buzzed with admirers, her canvases vibrant and alive, telling stories of love, loss, and ultimately, hope. Jerry stood proudly by her side, introducing her to his colleagues, not as his girlfriend, but as the incredible artist, Ava Bell. He beamed with pride as she eloquently discussed her work, her passion infectious. "This piece," she said, gesturing to a swirling abstract of intertwined blues and golds, "is about finding strength in vulnerability, about letting go of old fears to embrace a new, shared horizon." She glanced at Jerry, a private smile passing between them. Later, back in her studio, bathed in the soft glow of a dozen fairy lights, they celebrated their unspoken triumphs. Jerry uncorked a bottle of champagne, pouring them each a glass. "To the masterpiece," he said, raising his glass, his eyes full of tenderness as he looked at her. "To the masterpiece we're still painting," she corrected, clinking her glass against his. They settled on the sofa, her head resting on his chest, the faint scent of turpentine and oil paint clinging to her hair. He stroked her arm, a rhythm of contentment. "You know," he murmured, his voice husky, "I finally realized what I was truly building all along. It wasn't just buildings, Ava. It was a home, our home." She looked up at him, her eyes soft and full of love. "And it's a beautiful one, Jerry. The most beautiful masterpiece of all." He kissed her then, a slow, deep kiss that promised forever, a gentle affirmation of the quiet harbor they had finally found together, their canvas mended, their future unfolding, vibrant and true. The end. We hope you enjoyed that tale. Our next story begins now. Story 3. Rivalry's Embrace. The Shadow of the Endowment. The fluorescent hum of the history department at Crestview University was a constant, low thrum against Lucas Patterson's nerves. He ran a hand through his perpetually rumpled dark hair, his gaze fixed on the intricate medieval manuscript displayed on his monitor, a relic from a forgotten European principality, the subject of his potential magnum opus. Feudal fissures, power dynamics in the pre-Enlightenment Balkans. The project was audacious, demanding, and utterly consuming. It was also, he knew, the same project Helen Wright was vying for with her own equally ambitious Serbian scrolls, gendered power in medieval Slavic states. The thought of her, just 2 floors above him, meticulously crafting her own proposal for the prestigious Sterling Endowment, sent a familiar prickle of irritation and, if he was honest, a jolt of reluctant respect through him. Lucas was an enigma in academia, a meticulous scholar with the intensity of a seasoned detective, but also a man who preferred worn, leather-bound books to sleek e-readers, and whose office, despite his best efforts, always retained the scent of old paper and lukewarm coffee. His ambition was a quiet roar, driving him relentlessly, fueled by a desire to unearth forgotten narratives and reshape historical understanding. The Sterling Endowment wasn't just a grant. It was the key to a dedicated research team, unfettered travel, and the academic validation he craved. The source of his current gnawing anxiety wasn't solely the daunting scope of his research. It was the Helen Wright factor, Dr. Helen Wright. Her name alone conjured an image, sharp, elegant, with eyes that could dissect a faulty premise faster than he could articulate it. She taught Slavic studies, and her intellect was as formidable as her poise. Lucas had tangled with her in departmental meetings, on review committees, and in the annual faculty softball game, where she inexplicably excelled despite her pristine appearance. Their academic sparring was legendary, a polite but potent rivalry that the entire department both secretly relished and found vaguely unsettling. It was a dance of intellectual one-upmanship, punctuated by barbed compliments and thinly veiled critiques. This morning, the fissure in his carefully constructed professional calm felt wider than usual. He'd just received an email. Sterling Endowment Preliminary Review Committee. Mandatory Information Session. Friday, 9 a.m. The subject line was innocuous enough, but the implied competition was a sharp knife to his gut. He knew she'd be there, radiating an air of calm confidence that always managed to get under his skin. He tried to lose himself in the script of the illuminated manuscript, tracing the faded gold leaf with a distracted finger. His work was good, he told himself. His methodology was sound, his hypotheses groundbreaking. He just needed to articulate it with the precision of a master craftsman, unmarred by the specter of Helen and her infuriating brilliance. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. "Lucas? Got a moment?" His heart gave an involuntary lurch. Speak of the devil. He looked up to see her framed in his doorway, a stack of heavy volumes cradled in one arm. Helen. Her auburn hair, usually meticulously pinned, had a few rebellious tendrils escaping, framing a face that was, even in his moments of most intense irritation, undeniably striking. She wore a tailored tweed jacket over a silk blouse, an outfit that screamed serious academic while subtly hinting at the elegant woman beneath. "Helen," he managed, his voice a little gruffer than intended. "To what do I owe the pleasure? Come to gloat about an early submission?" A faint, almost imperceptible smile played on her lips. "Hardly, though, judging by the dark circles under your eyes, you might need to take a page from my early to bed, early to rise philosophy." Her gaze swept over his messy desk, lingering for a fraction longer than strictly necessary on a crumpled, half-eaten granola bar wrapper. Or at least, early to bed, less prone to consuming processed carbs. Lucas bristled. "My research habits are my own. Thank you very much. What can I do for you?" She stepped inside, and the subtle scent of lavender and old paper filled his office, a strange mélange that was distinctly her. "I need to confirm a citation. The 15th century Bosnian Chronicle, The Lament of Kraljevich Marko. My copy has a section that seems inconsistent with my other sources, specifically concerning the taxation of monastic lands. You're the resident expert on medieval Balkan ecclesiastical economics, after all." The last part was delivered with a hint of acid, a reminder of a past debate where he had, in fact, outmaneuvered her on a technical point. He leaned back in his chair, trying to project an air of nonchalance he didn't feel. "Ah, yes. Marco. A tricky fellow. You're probably looking at the Venetian edition. It's notoriously mistranscribed. You want the Ragusa Codex, much more reliable. Page 73, footnote 4, if I recall." He cited it from memory, a small, triumphant smirk touching his lips. It was a point of pride that he knew these obscure texts intimately. Helen's eyebrows, perfectly arched, rose slightly. "Impressive, Patterson. Still, I prefer to verify with my own eyes." She gestured to the volumes in her arm. "Which brings me to my secondary, less intellectual, more logistical purpose. I'm hosting the Sterling Endowment team for a preliminary interview next week, and I'm afraid my office is less than ideal for projecting the image of a world-class scholar. My book delivery was delayed." He eyed her office, which he knew was always impeccably organized. The explanation felt flimsy, a polite excuse to pry. "And you need?" "Your conference room, if you're not using it. Just for an hour." She paused, her gaze locking with his. "Or rather, your large, soundproof, relatively uncluttered office that happens to have the only available projector in the department after mine malfunctioned this morning." They moved my presentation up unexpectedly. Lucas's office wasn't just large. It was one of the prime spaces in the department, usually reserved for senior professors. He'd snagged it after a particularly successful publication. He knew she coveted it. "My office?" he repeated, a slow burn starting in his chest. "Helen, you know I'm prepping for my own Sterling presentation. My materials are sensitive." "Hardly. I wouldn't dream of peering at your precious medieval musings," she retorted, her voice light but firm. "It's just for an hour, Lucas. A courtesy among colleagues." The word colleagues sounded like a carefully chosen weapon. He hesitated, weighing his options. Refusing her would look petty, unprofessional, especially if the department chair caught wind. Allowing her in meant an invasion of his intellectual sanctuary, a momentary surrender to her pervasive presence. And yet, the thought of her, just yards from his most personal work, made his skin prickle with a different kind of awareness. "Fine," he grunted, the word clipped. "But don't touch anything, and don't spill coffee on my research notes. You know how meticulous I am." Helen's smile widened, a flash of genuine amusement that momentarily softened her usually composed features. "Wouldn't dream of it, Lucas. I appreciate it. Truly." The truly sounded almost sincere. As she turned to leave, her gaze again drifted to his monitor, resting for a moment on the manuscript. "Balkan principalities? Fascinating. Though I always found the interplay of religious authority and emergent statehood in the Serbian kingdom far more compelling." He watched her go, a fresh wave of annoyance. and something else, a strange, unsettling flutter in his stomach, washing over him. The Sterling Endowment wasn't just a grant, it was about legacy. And sharing his space, even for an hour, with his most formidable rival, felt less like professional courtesy and more like an unwelcome, yet undeniably captivating intrusion. The fissure beneath his control deepened, threatening to crack wide open. Shared walls, stirring currents. The university's email arrived 2 days later, an innocuous memo with earth-shattering implications. Mandatory collaboration initiative, Sterling Endowment applicants. Due to a new progressive directive from the dean, the final 2 candidates for the Sterling Endowment, Lucas Patterson and Helen Wright, were required to participate in a week-long, off-campus, intensive interdisciplinary retreat at the secluded Redwood Hollow Academic Center. The goal: to foster collaboration, evaluate their project's synergistic potential, and, in the dean's overly enthusiastic words, cultivate a new paradigm of scholarly unity. Lucas stared at the screen, speechless. Synergistic potential? Scholarly unity? It was a thinly veiled attempt to force them to share resources and, he suspected, to observe their interactions under pressure. And, to his absolute horror, the intensive nature of the retreat meant shared living quarters, a single 2-bedroom cabin, complete with a communal living area and a small, functional kitchen. He called the department chair, Professor Albright, a man whose tenure had outlasted 3 deans and whose patience was notoriously thin. Professor Albright, this is absurd. Helen and I are rivals, not collaborators. We're competing for the same grant. Albright's voice was a dry rasp over the phone. Precisely, Patterson. This is about seeing how you handle that competition. And frankly, the deans decided it's a good PR move. Fostering cooperation, even among the keenest minds. Don't fight it. Just go. And try not to strangle each other. Or worse, fall in love. That would be an administrative nightmare, Albright chuckled, a sound like gravel rolling down a hill. Lucas hung up, fuming. Fall in love? The idea was preposterous. He and Helen Wright? It was an intellectual battle, not a romance novel. Yet the thought sent a shiver down his spine, a strange mix of dread and something uncomfortably akin to anticipation. Redwood Hollow was even more remote than he'd imagined. Nestled deep within an ancient redwood forest, the cabins were rustic but comfortable. Cabin #3, his and Helen's. He unlocked the door, stepping into a living room with a stone fireplace, a small dining table, and a worn but inviting sofa. 2 doors led off to separate bedrooms. A single shared bathroom. This was going to be a long week. He chose the bedroom on the left, tossing his duffel bag onto the queen-sized bed. His laptop, stacks of research notes, and his favorite worn copy of The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire were carefully placed on the small desk. He was halfway through unpacking when he heard the crunch of tires on gravel outside, followed by the familiar, crisp sound of Helen's voice. "Good afternoon, Lucas." Settling in? She stood in the doorway, a designer carry-on bag in one hand, a sensible but stylish tote in the other. Her hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and she wore practical hiking boots beneath tailored trousers, somehow managing to look both ready for the wilderness and prepared for a keynote address. As much as one can settle into a forced confinement with one's academic nemesis, he grumbled, not looking up from arranging his books. "Charming as ever," she replied, her tone perfectly even, but with a subtle undertone of amusement. She walked past him, a wisp of lavender scent preceding her, and opened the door to the right-hand bedroom. "Ah, a view of the stream. Excellent." For the first 2 days, they maintained a tense, polite distance. They worked in the shared living space, their laptops humming in a strange duet, punctuated by the rustle of turning pages and the occasional pointed cough. Mealtimes were excruciatingly civil. They discussed their respective research in abstract terms, careful not to reveal too much, circling each other like wary intellectual predators. On the 3rd evening, a thunderstorm rolled in, shaking the cabin and plunging it into darkness. The only light came from the crackling fireplace Lucas had, surprisingly, managed to coax into life. Helen, who had been engrossed in her reading, startled as the cabin went dark. "Damn," she muttered, fumbling for her phone. "No signal out here for a lantern app." Lucas, now comfortably sprawled on the rug before the fire, glanced at her. There's a box of candles in the cupboard above the sink. And matches. She found them. And soon the cabin was bathed in a softer, warmer glow. The storm outside raged, a primeval symphony of wind and rain. Suddenly, the academic tension felt less pressing, replaced by the intimacy of their shared vulnerability in the face of nature. "You know," Helen said, her voice a little softer in the flickering light, "your paper on the socio-economic impact of the Ottoman conquest on Hungarian peasantry, it was quite brilliant. Especially your nuanced take on land tenure shifts." Lucas blinked, genuinely surprised. "You actually read that? I thought you dismissed it as unnecessarily granular." She laughed, a genuine, unforced sound that sent a jolt through him. "I did, initially. But I revisited it for a comparative analysis last year. I was wrong. The granularity was the genius." She paused. "Your passion for uncovering the everyday lives of ordinary people, not just kings and queens, it's commendable. Often overlooked in our field." He felt a blush creep up his neck. Praise from Helen was rarer than a clear day in a London fog. "And your work on the linguistic evolution of Old Church Slavonic in liturgical texts," he found himself saying, "your theory on the influences from early Byzantine chant, it's revolutionary." "I admit, I found it incredibly insightful." Silence descended, but it was a different kind of silence now. Not tense, but aware. The fire crackled, rain lashed against the windows, and the air between them shimmered with a new, fragile understanding. They were more than just rivals. They were two minds fiercely dedicated to the same pursuit of knowledge, capable of appreciating each other's distinct brilliance. The enforced proximity was doing its job, but not in the way the dean had intended. It was slowly, irrevocably, breaking down their carefully constructed academic walls. The stirring currents beneath their surface civility were growing stronger, pulling them towards an unknown, undeniable destination, beneath the ivory tower's gaze. The Redwood Hollow retreat, intended to foster collaboration, was inadvertently stoking a different kind of fire between Lucas and Helen. The shared meals, the evenings spent by the crackling fireplace as the storm lingered, had chipped away at their professional masks. They found themselves talking not just about their research, but about their lives, the frustrations of academic politics, the joy of a new discovery, even childhood memories. Helen confessed her secret love for trashy sci-fi novels. Lucas admitted to a weakness for terrible 80 seconds pop anthems. These were small confessions, but in the context of their long-standing rivalry, they felt monumental. One evening, after another day spent in intense individual work, they found themselves in the shared kitchen, both reaching for the kettle simultaneously. Their hands brushed. A jolt, electric and undeniable, shot through Lucas. He saw Helen flinch, her gaze flicking up to meet his, a sudden spark of something raw and unbidden in her usually composed eyes. "Sorry," she murmured, pulling her hand back quickly. "Clumsy." "No," he said, his voice a little rougher than intended. "It's fine." The air was thick with unspoken tension. They made tea in silence, the clinking of mugs sounding impossibly loud in the quiet cabin. The scent of black tea and, faintly, Helen's lavender mingled in the small space. Later that night, the grant application deadlines loomed, pushing them to work late. Lucas was hunched over his laptop in the living room, meticulously cross-referencing a particularly obscure Byzantine legal text. Helen was at the dining table, her brow furrowed in concentration as she refined her introduction. The only sounds were their keyboards clicking and the occasional rustle of paper. "This is impossible," Helen suddenly declared, leaning back in her chair, a hand pressed to her temple. "My argument for the sociolinguistic impact of the Cyril and Methodius mission feels underdeveloped, like I'm just scratching the surface." Lucas looked up. He knew her work, knew the depth of her analysis. He also knew she was prone to perfectionism, to tearing down her own arguments just before the finish line. "It's not underdeveloped, Helen. You're just hitting the pre-submission jitters. Happens to everyone." "Easy for you to say," she retorted. But there was no real venom in her voice. "Your Feudal Fissures project is so tightly structured, so elegantly argued, it practically writes itself. It's taken me 5 years of blood, sweat, and caffeine to get it to this point," he countered, a slight smile playing on his lips. He rose from his spot on the sofa and walked over to her, stopping just behind her chair. "Show me. Maybe a fresh pair of eyes can spot something." She hesitated for a moment, then sighed, turning her laptop slightly so he could see. "Here, this paragraph on the role of early monastic scriptoria. I feel it needs more punch." He leaned over her shoulder, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from her, to catch the subtle scent of her shampoo. He found himself focusing less on the words on the screen and more on the graceful curve of her neck, the way a loose strand of auburn hair brushed her cheek. His breath hitched slightly. He mumbled, trying to focus. "The punch isn't in what you say, Helen. It's in what you imply. You've laid the groundwork for a revolutionary reinterpretation of how intellectual currents bypassed established power structures. Lean into that. Make it explicit. Don't be afraid to be audacious." He pointed to a specific sentence on the screen, his finger hovering inches from hers. She looked up, her face turning, her breath warm against his cheek. Their eyes met. The cabin, the deadlines, the entire academic world seemed to recede, replaced by the overwhelming, undeniable pull between them. The flickering candlelight cast long shadows, blurring the lines between their professional rivalry and their burgeoning personal connection. "Audacious," she whispered, her voice husky. Her gaze dropped to his lips. He swallowed hard. "Yes, you have it in you, Helen. To be audacious." The words felt weighted with a double meaning. The air crackled, not with the storm, but with pure, unadulterated desire. The scent of her, the proximity, the shared vulnerability of the moment. It was intoxicating. She reached out, her fingers gently touching his arm. A feather-light brush that sent a shiver through his entire body. "Lucas," she breathed, her eyes wide. A question, a plea, and an invitation all rolled into one. He couldn't speak. He could only lean closer, his hand coming up to cup her cheek, his thumb gently stroking her skin. Her eyes fluttered shut as he lowered his head, his lips meeting hers in a tentative, then urgent kiss. It was a kiss that tasted of shared stress, of unspoken longing, of years of intellectual sparring finally culminating in a physical surrender. The ivory tower, with all its expectations and rivalries, felt a million miles away, eclipsed by the burning intensity of the moment. The point of no return had been crossed. The unspoken thesis of touch. The kiss deepened, a torrent of pent-up desire finally unleashed. Helen's fingers tightened on his arm, then slid up to entangle themselves in his hair, tugging gently, urging him closer. Lucas's hand, still cupping her cheek, shifted, his thumb tracing the delicate curve of her jawline before tilting her head back slightly, deepening their embrace. He tasted coffee, and something else, something uniquely Helen, a mix of mint and a subtle floral sweetness. His mind, usually so meticulously organized, dissolved into pure sensation. "Helen," he breathed against her lips, a guttural sound that was half question, half desperate affirmation. "Lucas," she whispered back, her voice laced with a raw urgency that thrilled him. She pushed herself up from the chair, pressing her body against his, her curves aligning perfectly with his hard frame. The friction, even through their clothes, sent a jolt of electricity through him. Her hands roamed over his back, pressing him closer still, as if trying to merge them into one. He groaned, his own hands finding her waist, then sliding lower to cup her hips, pulling her flush against him. He could feel the soft fabric of her trousers, the warmth of her skin beneath, the academic rigor, the polite rivalry, the years of intellectual combat. It all melted away under the heat of their shared hunger. This wasn't about grants or publications. This was primal, undeniable, and utterly consuming. His lips moved from hers, trailing a path down her jaw to her ear, where he nipped gently. "You have no idea," he murmured, his voice hoarse, "how long I've wanted to do that." She shivered, pressing her face against his neck. "Oh, I think I have some idea, Patterson. The way you look at me during departmental meetings, I thought it was loathing." He chuckled, a low, rumbling sound. A particular kind of loathing, perhaps. One that involves an alarming amount of yearning. He moved them both away from the dining table, towards the small, worn sofa by the fireplace. The flames cast dancing shadows, painting their entwined forms in shades of amber and rose. They tumbled onto the cushions, A soft landing. He hovered above her, his gaze devouring her, her eyes bright with a fierce desire that mirrored his own. Her hair, which had been so meticulously pinned, was now escaping, a glorious auburn halo around her flushed face. "You're beautiful, Helen," he confessed. The words ripped from him with an honesty that surprised even himself. A soft gasp escaped her lips. "Lucas, don't flatter me now. Just—" She reached up, pulling him down for another searing kiss. Her mouth was open, inviting, and he plunged in, exploring the soft depths, tasting her, claiming her. Their tongues met, danced, tangled, a fierce, hungry conversation without words. His hands were busy, fumbling with the buttons of her silk blouse. She helped him, her fingers surprisingly nimble, unfastening them one by one. The fabric parted, revealing a glimpse of delicate lace and the soft swell of her breasts. He inhaled sharply, his desire intensifying. "May I?" he whispered, his eyes locked on hers, seeking explicit permission. Her answer was a soft moan, and then she arched her back, offering herself to his touch. He pushed the blouse off her shoulders, letting it fall to the floor. Then, with trembling fingers, he reached for the clasp of her bra. It gave way, and her breasts spilled free, full and tempting. He devoured them with his eyes first, then leaned down, his lips brushing over the soft skin, eliciting another moan from deep in her throat. His tongue flicked out, tracing the outline of one nipple, then taking it gently into his mouth, suckling softly. Helen cried out, her back arching, her fingers digging into his shoulders. "Oh, Lucas, yes, please." He alternated between her breasts, teasing, tasting, suckling, driving her to a frenzy. Meanwhile, his other hand found the zipper of her trousers, sliding it down with practiced ease. She lifted her hips slightly, allowing him to push the fabric down past her thighs until her lace panties were all that remained. "You're magnificent," he whispered against her skin, his voice thick with lust. "Every single brilliant, infuriating inch of you." He felt her shiver, her legs instinctively parting. He eased his body between her thighs, the hard ridge of his erection pressing against her. A soft whimper escaped her. "I need you, Helen," he confessed, his voice ragged with need. "God, I need you so much." "And you, Lucas," she replied, her voice breathless, her nails now raking lightly down his back, urging him to hurry. "Take me. Now." He shed his own clothes in a hasty scramble, his body taut with anticipation. When he was finally bare against her, skin to skin, the sensation was exquisite. The smooth warmth of her thighs against his, the soft brush of her pubic hair against his. He looked down at her, her eyes heavy-lidded, her lips swollen from their kisses, her body trembling beneath his. "Are you sure?" he asked. A final, hesitant check, wanting this to be real, to be what she truly wanted. "More than I've ever been sure of anything," she breathed, her hands reaching down, guiding him. "Don't stop, Lucas." He pushed forward, slowly, deliberately, feeling her open to him, her wet heat enveloping him. He held his breath, waiting for her reaction. A soft gasp, a slight tensing, then a complete, utter surrender as she wrapped her legs around his waist, pulling him deeper. "Oh," she moaned, a sound of pure pleasure. "Yes, that's it." He began to move, a slow, rhythmic thrust, each stroke deeper, more urgent. Her hips rose to meet his, matching his rhythm, urging him faster. The sofa creaked beneath them, but neither noticed. Their world had shrunk to the space between their bodies, the delicious friction, the pounding of their hearts, the ragged sounds of their pleasure. "Look at me," he commanded softly, catching her gaze. "You're mine, Helen, just for now." "Yours," she gasped, her voice breaking, her nails digging into his shoulders again. "Always, Lucas, always." Their climax hit them simultaneously, a wave of intense pleasure that crashed over them, leaving them breathless and trembling. He collapsed onto her, their bodies slick with sweat, their breaths mingling in the quiet cabin. The unspoken thesis of touch had been delivered, eloquently, passionately, but in the fragile aftermath, the lingering scent of sex and ambition, the core conflict of their intertwined lives still lay unaddressed between them. Morning's hushed acknowledgement. The morning after their passionate surrender dawned with a soft, misty light filtering through the redwood canopy. Lucas woke slowly, a delicious heaviness pinning him to the bed. He was in Helen's bed, their limbs still tangled, her head resting on his chest, her breath a soft caress against his skin. The scent of sex mingled with the faint lavender that was uniquely her. A profound sense of peace settled over him, something he hadn't realized he was missing until now. He shifted slightly, his arm tightening around her. Helen stirred, a soft moan escaping her lips as she burrowed deeper into his embrace. Her eyes fluttered open, dark and heavy-lidded, and met his. A blush crept up her neck, but there was no regret, only a lingering warmth in her gaze. "Morning, Patterson," she murmured, her voice raspy with sleep and recent passion. "Morning, right?" he replied, a small smile touching his lips. He leaned down, pressing a soft kiss to her forehead. "Sleep well?" "Better than I have in months," she confessed, her fingers tracing idle patterns on his chest. The silence that followed was comfortable, intimate, filled with the unspoken weight of what had happened between them. The intense, competitive energy that usually hummed around them had dissipated, replaced by a quiet, almost fragile, truce. They lay there for a long time, simply existing in each other's presence. Eventually, hunger stirred. "Coffee?" Lucas offered, his voice low. "Please," she whispered. He untangled himself carefully, rising from the bed. He caught a glimpse of his reflection in the dresser mirror. Rumpled hair, faint stubble, a contented, slightly dazed look in his eyes. He felt different, lighter. He pulled on a pair of boxers and padded out to the kitchen, Helen's silk robe tied loosely around him. He found her coffee beans, ground them, and started the pot. Helen emerged a few minutes later, wrapped in a blanket, looking deliciously disheveled. She watched him, a faint smile on her face. "You make coffee?" It wasn't a question, but an observation laced with surprise. "Among other things," he teased, pouring 2 mugs. He handed one to her, their fingers brushing. Another subtle spark, a reminder of the night's intimacy. They sat at the small dining table, sipping their coffee, the rhythmic drip of the coffee maker the only sound. The academic retreat, the grant, their rivalry, it all felt distant, momentarily suspended. This was a bubble, a small, private world they had created in the heart of the redwoods. "About last night," Helen began, her voice soft, her gaze fixed on the steam rising from her mug. Lucas reached across the table, covering her hand with his. "It was incredible, Helen." She looked up, her eyes searching his. "It was. But what does this mean, Lucas? We're still competing for the Sterling endowment. That hasn't changed." He squeezed her hand gently. "No, it hasn't. And I still want to win it. Desperately." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "But it doesn't diminish what we felt, what we shared." He hesitated, then added, "Or what I feel for you." Her breath hitched. "What do you feel, Lucas?" He met her gaze, his heart thrumming. "I feel like I've known you forever, and I've fought you for just as long. And last night, all that fight turned into something else. Something I don't want to let go of." He lifted her hand, pressing a soft kiss to her knuckles. "It complicates things, yes. But maybe it's a complication worth having." A thoughtful expression settled on her face, a mix of relief and lingering uncertainty. "It certainly complicates things," she repeated, a ghost of her usual academic analytical tone returning. "But perhaps you're right. Perhaps it is." They spent the rest of the day in a fragile, unspoken understanding. They returned to their respective work, but the atmosphere was different. There were stolen glances, lingering touches, a shared smile over a particularly dense paragraph. When Lucas found himself stuck on a translation of an archaic Bulgarian phrase, Helen, without a word, leaned over and offered a nuanced interpretation that instantly clarified the text. He thanked her, and for a moment, their hands brushed, sending another spark through them. That evening, they cooked dinner together, moving around each other in the small kitchen with a surprising ease. He watched her chop vegetables with precise, elegant movements, her brow furrowed in concentration. She looked up and caught his gaze, a soft smile blooming on her face. As they ate, the conversation flowed more freely. They discussed their projects, no longer guarding their ideas so fiercely. He found himself offering suggestions for her sociolinguistic argument, and she, in turn, challenged him on a point about feudal land rights, prompting a lively, stimulating debate that now felt less like a contest and more like a shared exploration. After dinner, as the sky outside turned a deep indigo, they sat by the fireplace again, sipping wine. Helen leaned her head on his shoulder, and Lucas wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close. The quiet intimacy was profound. The academic rivalry, the sterling endowment, the pressures of their profession. They were all still there, a silent presence in the background. But for now, in the hushed acknowledgement of their shared mourning, a fragile truce held, a temporary peace carved out of the wilderness and their newfound connection. The unspoken words hung in the air. This changes everything. And can we survive it? The shattered hypothesis. The bubble of Redwood Hollow burst the moment they returned to the concrete reality of Crestview University. The shared cabin, the intimate mornings, the whispers in the dark. All of it faded under the harsh fluorescent lights of the history department. The Sterling Endowment final decision was just a week away, and the air in the faculty lounge crackled with anticipation and thinly veiled gossip. Lucas and Helen tried to maintain a semblance of their old rivalry, but it was impossible. Every glance, every accidental brush of hands in the hallway carried the weight of their secret. Their colleagues, sensing a shift, eyed them with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. Professor Albright, their department chair, even gave them a knowing, almost conspiratorial wink at one point, which sent a fresh wave of panic through Lucas. The real unraveling began at the department's pre-Sterling presentation mixer. It was a stifling affair, filled with forced smiles and anxious chatter. Lucas, nursing a lukewarm glass of white wine, scanned the room for Helen. He found her by the window, deep in conversation with Dr. 24. Thorne, a notoriously gossipy and competitive colleague from the Medieval Studies department. Thorne, whose own grant application had been rejected in the preliminary round, had a particular disdain for both Lucas and Helen. As Lucas approached, he heard Thorne's voice, pitched low but clearly audible. "So, the rumors are true? You and Patterson, sharing a cabin at Redwood Hollow? Quite the collaboration, if you ask me. I hear the dean's quite pleased with the unity you two displayed." There was a sneer in Thorne's voice that made Lucas's blood run cold. Helen's face was a mask of polite frostiness, but Lucas saw the subtle tension in her jaw. "Dr. Thorne, our shared accommodations were mandated by the university as part of a new interdisciplinary initiative. Our focus was, as always, on our research." Of course, Thorne purred, completely unconvinced. Though one does wonder if certain advantages might accrue to candidates who are seen to be forming partnerships. Wouldn't want to create an unfair playing field, would we? Especially with such a significant endowment at stake. Thorne shot a pointed glance at Lucas, who had now reached their small group. The implication hung in the air, heavy and poisonous, that their shared intimacy, if known, could be seen as an unprofessional alliance, potentially compromising the integrity of the grant selection process. That their connection, instead of being a private burgeoning love, could be weaponized against them, turning their competitive drive into a liability. Helen's eyes met Lucas's, a flash of fear and hurt in their depths. Before either of them could respond, Thorne excused himself, a smug grin on his face. "He's wrong, Helen," Lucas said immediately, his voice low and urgent. "What we have, what we shared, has nothing to do with the grant." But Helen pulled away from him, her composure cracking. "Doesn't it, Lucas? Doesn't it? Thorne just made it very clear that our collaboration could be seen as an unfair advantage. Or worse, a cynical manipulation to curry favor." Her voice trembled. "What if they think I was just trying to get closer to you for your ideas? Or you to me?" "That's absurd," Lucas protested, hurt by the implication. "Do you honestly think that?" "I don't know what to think," she retorted, her voice rising slightly. "All I know is that my entire career, my reputation, my self-worth is tied up in this grant. And now, thanks to us, it could be jeopardized." She gestured wildly around the room, as if the walls were closing in. "This isn't just about academic unity, Lucas. This is about who gets the funding, Who gets the prestige? Who gets to define the narrative? The raw, unvarnished fear in her eyes struck him, but so did the sting of her words. He felt suddenly exposed, his own carefully constructed world of intellectual integrity threatened. "So, this is it then?" he said, his voice cold, hurt lacing every word. "Our connection was just a liability, a mistake." "Don't put words in my mouth, Lucas," she snapped, her eyes flashing. "But yes, maybe it was a mistake. A monumental, career-threatening mistake. I can't afford this, Lucas. I can't afford to be seen as anything less than rigorously professional, especially not now." Her hands clenched into fists at her sides. This is my legacy, my opportunity. His own work stress, his ambition, all the competitive instincts he'd buried under layers of tenderness at Redwood Hollow, surged to the surface. He felt a familiar anger, mixed with a deeper, more painful sense of betrayal. "And mine, Helen, don't you think I've worked just as hard for this? Don't you think my legacy matters?" He took a step closer, his voice low and dangerous. "Are you saying that what we shared, that you shared, was just a distraction? A momentary lapse in judgment that you now regret?" Her face was pale, her lips pressed into a thin line. "I'm saying," she bit out, "that I regret anything that compromises my ability to secure this grant. Anything that casts doubt on my credibility as a scholar. And yes, Lucas, right now, we compromise that." The words were a physical blow. Lucas felt as though a chasm had opened between them, wider and deeper than any academic rivalry. The beautiful, fragile thing they had started to build had shattered, broken by the brutal realities of their professional lives. The hypothesis of their potential future together lay in ruins. He turned away, unable to bear the sight of her, his heart aching with a pain more profound than any professional setback could inflict. The quiet rewrite of our story. The days following the mixer were a blur of cold silence and sharp, aching regret. Lucas threw himself into his work, his office becoming a solitary fortress. Every historical text he touched, every footnote he verified, felt hollow, devoid of the passion that Helen had, inadvertently, reignited in him. The thought of the sterling endowment, once his driving force, now tasted like ash. He missed her fierce intellect, her quiet laughter, the scent of lavender that used to fill his space. Helen, he knew, was doing the same. He saw her only in passing, her face pale, her gaze averted. The competitive fire between them had died, replaced by a suffocating estrangement. The grant announcement was looming, and the tension in the department was palpable. But Lucas realized, with a sickening clarity, that winning it without her, or losing it because of their entanglement, would both be equally devastating. One evening, after the last of the students had left and the university halls were eerily quiet, Lucas found himself staring at the medieval manuscript on his screen, its intricate designs now seeming utterly meaningless. He closed his laptop. He couldn't do this anymore. He couldn't pretend their connection hadn't happened, or that it wasn't more important than any grant. He stood up, his decision made, a sudden surge of resolve hardening his features. He knew where she would be. Helen always sought refuge in the quiet corners of the main library when she was under immense stress, usually in the special collections section, surrounded by the oldest, most comforting tomes. He found her there, as predicted, hunched over a heavy volume, the faint lamplight illuminating her drawn face. Her shoulders were slumped, and she looked utterly exhausted. He watched her for a moment, his heart clenching. He realized he didn't just desire her. He loved her. He loved her brilliant mind, her fierce independence, her vulnerability, and even her infuriating perfectionism. He cleared his throat. Helen started, looking up sharply, her eyes widening in surprise, then quickly narrowing with a flicker of the old defensiveness. "Lucas," she said, her voice flat, "what are you doing here?" "I came for you," he said simply, walking towards her table. He stopped directly in front of her, his hands resting lightly on the polished wood. "I came because I can't go another day like this, and I certainly can't face the sterling announcement without talking to you." She closed the book she was holding with a soft thud. "There's nothing to talk about, Lucas. We both know where we stand. Professional integrity above all else, right?" Her voice was laced with pain. "No," he said, shaking his head. "Wrong. That's not where we stand. Not for me, anyway." Professional integrity is important, yes, but it doesn't mean sacrificing everything else. It doesn't mean sacrificing us. He leaned in closer, lowering his voice. I love you, Helen. I realized it at Redwood Hollow, and I felt it shatter when you pulled away. I can't pretend otherwise. Her breath hitched, her eyes, usually so guarded, filled with tears. Lucas. No, he interrupted gently. Let me finish. I know you're terrified, Helen. I know what this grant means to you, but I also know what we mean. That night, at Redwood Hollow, it wasn't a mistake. It was a revelation. And if Thorne's accusations, or the Dean's misguided collaboration initiative, threatens your credibility, then we'll face it together. We'll fight it together. But I won't lose you over this, not over a grant. He reached out, his hand gently cupping her cheek, wiping away a single tear that escaped. I want you, Helen. All of you. Your brilliance, your ambition, your passion, and the woman who hides behind the academic facade. The woman who laughed by the fireplace, who confessed to sci-fi novels, who makes my heart ache with a desire that runs deeper than any professional rivalry. Please, tell me you feel it too. She looked at him, her gaze raw and vulnerable, and then, slowly, a fragile hope bloomed in her eyes. I do, Lucas, she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. God help me, I do. I've been so scared. Scared of losing everything I've worked for. Scared of what this us could mean for my career. But I'm more scared of losing you. With a soft sob, she rose from her chair, stepping into his arms. He held her tight, burying his face in her hair, inhaling her familiar scent. We'll figure it out, he murmured into her hair. We always do. He led her out of the library, their footsteps echoing softly in the empty halls. They didn't go back to their separate offices. Instead, Lucas took her to his own apartment, a space he rarely invited anyone to, a testament to his guarded nature. It was Spartan, filled with books and antique maps. But now, with Helen in it, it felt warm, alive. He led her to his bedroom, a room usually reserved for solitary thought and sleep. As he closed the door, the world outside, with its academic pressures and rivalries, faded into insignificance. This was their sanctuary, their new space for healing. He turned to her, her face still tear-streaked but now softened with a profound love. He reached out, gently unbuttoning her blouse, his movements slow and tender. This wasn't about the desperate hunger of Redwood Hollow. This was about reclaiming, about rebuilding, about affirming the love they had confessed. Let's rewrite our story, Helen, he whispered, his lips brushing against her bare shoulder as he pushed the fabric away. From here, it's about us. She nodded, her hands reaching for his shirt, her eyes never leaving his. Yes, she breathed, her voice filled with a quiet certainty. Yes, Lucas, let's. They shed their clothes slowly, deliberately, their eyes locked, each touch a promise, each kiss a vow. This time, their intimacy was laced with a profound tenderness, a shared understanding that transcended mere passion. On his bed, amidst the quiet hum of his apartment, they made love not just with their bodies, but with their hearts, whispering reassurances, reaffirming their commitment, slowly but surely, reclaiming their love from the shadows of fear and rivalry. It was the quiet rewrite of their story, a new chapter born of honesty and profound, unwavering love. A shared future, a unified theory. The Sterling Endowment announcement arrived via email, terse and to the point. Lucas and Helen, sitting side by side in his apartment, held their breaths as they opened it simultaneously. The news was both expected and unexpected, due to the exceptional quality of both proposals and a perceived synergistic potential. Professor Albright's influence, Lucas suspected. The Sterling Foundation had decided to award 2 grants, one for Lucas's Feudal Fishers and one for Helen's Serbian Scrolls. Helen let out a gasp, a mix of relief and pure elation. Lucas, we both got it. She turned to him, her eyes shining, a wide, uninhibited smile spreading across her face. He pulled her into a fierce hug, laughing with genuine joy. We did it, Helen. Or rather, you did it, I did it, we did it. The relief was immense, but more profound was the understanding that had settled between them. The grant, once the sole focus of their ambition, now felt secondary to the partnership they had forged. The academic rivalry hadn't disappeared entirely. It had simply transformed. It was no longer a destructive competition, but a playful, stimulating exchange, a core part of their mutual admiration. They decided to keep their relationship private for a while, a precious secret guarded from the gossiping eyes of the department. But in their shared lives, there was an open, honest, and deeply loving connection. They moved into a larger apartment together, a space with 2 studies, each filled with their respective books and research, but also a shared living room where they spent evenings debating, laughing, and simply being. Their professional lives flourished. Lucas's research on Balkan principalities gained international recognition, and Helen's work on Slavic sociolinguistics opened new avenues of study. They still challenged each other, still critiqued each other's papers with brutal honesty. But now, it was always with an underlying current of support and respect. One quiet Saturday morning, Lucas found Helen in her study. Her brow furrowed in concentration as she reviewed a draft of a co-authored paper they were collaborating on, a comparative study of monastic land ownership across medieval Eastern and Western Europe, a perfect melding of their expertise. He leaned against the doorframe, watching her. Her hair was loose, falling over her shoulders, and she wore one of his old, oversized shirts, making her look both utterly comfortable and incredibly desirable. He walked over, circling her desk, and pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "Making progress on our unified theory?" he teased. She smiled, leaning back in her chair. "Almost. Just debating the phrasing of the concluding paragraph. We need to emphasize the interconnectedness, the shared human experience that transcends geopolitical divides." "Indeed," he murmured, his hands finding her shoulders and gently massaging them. "A unified theory of love, perhaps?" She chuckled, turning in her chair to face him. "Is that what we're calling it now, Professor Patterson?" "It seems appropriate, Professor Wright," he replied, his gaze warm and tender. He leaned down, capturing her lips in a soft, lingering kiss. This kiss wasn't urgent or desperate, but gentle, full of the quiet contentment that had become their everyday. It tasted of morning coffee and shared dreams. "I wouldn't trade this," she whispered against his lips, "for all the grants in the world." "Nor I," he agreed, tightening his embrace. "Our collaboration, our synergy, it's far more valuable." They spent the rest of the morning in a comfortable domesticity, alternating between working on their paper, making brunch together, and simply enjoying each other's presence. Later, as the afternoon sun streamed through their window, painting golden stripes across their rug, Lucas found himself gazing at Helen, curled up beside him on the sofa, a book open on her chest. Fast asleep, he gently reached out, stroking a stray tendril of hair from her face. Their journey had been tumultuous, born of rivalry and intense work stress, complicated by forced proximity and shattered hypotheses. But from the chaos, they had forged something beautiful, something profoundly stable. They were 2 brilliant minds, 2 ambitious souls, now inextricably linked, building a shared future where academic rigor and deep, abiding love coexisted in perfect, harmonious balance. Their story, once a battle of wits, had become a testament to the quiet power of love, the most compelling, unified theory of all. The end.